Hello beautiful people, my name is Vendi and today I'm here to bring you the first episode of a new series that I plan to do here called Craft Chat, where I talk about certain elements of the writing craft in very short bite-sized videos to hopefully give you guys a brief overview of how to do things. In today's episode, I'm going to be covering conflict. I'm going to briefly tell you guys what it is and how it is best used. So let's get started. So, long story made very short, conflict is what makes a plot go. If you've taken an English class in the United States, then you probably recognize this plot diagram. It sort of measures the trajectory of a story where this little bit is the exposition where you're figuring out what's going on, and then this point right here, we call it the inciting incident, and that is what starts off the rising action that takes you to the climax. That point is really important because that is where the conflict is introduced. Without conflict, a plot would look like that. Now you might be thinking, okay, that's all well and good. Let me just throw the most exciting conflict possible into the story and make my characters deal with it and everything will be hunky-dory and I'll have a bestseller in no time. That is where you would be wrong. Before you start coming up with a conflict, it's best to figure out why it works the way it does and how to make it work as effectively as possible. Conflict can be categorized into two major subgroups. The first of these is internal, where basically your main character's greatest enemy is themselves. Any characters ever experienced some sort of self-doubt or a fear of who they are as a person and an unwillingness to change themselves has experienced internal conflict. Internal conflict doesn't always stand on its own. The conflict that internal conflict is most often merged with is the second subgroup, which is external. Unlike internal conflict, this has several subheadings. The first of these types is your main character versus another character. With this sort of conflict, your main character's goals and ambitions are in direct conflict with an antagonist's goals and ambitions, and they clash. For this, think Harry Potter and Voldemort. Harry wants to stay alive, Voldemort very much does not want him to stay alive, and so the two are a bit at odds, wouldn't you say? The second sort of external conflict is like the first one, but on a grander scale. It's when the main character's goals and motivations are in direct conflict with the goals and motivations of an entire society. In this scenario, the main character is a bit of an outcast and has to fight to assert what they believe is right and just against what they believe is an unjust world. The best example that I can think of this actually is 1984 by George Orwell, even though it doesn't end very happily for our protagonist. The third sort is what I would call like the classic survivor story, and that is the main character versus nature. Unlike in the previous two that I mentioned, the antagonist doesn't really have goals and motivations that are in contrast to the main characters. It simply doesn't care that the main character exists. It is a harsh tundra or rainforest or a difficult place for the main character to survive, and his goals and motivations are very much to survive this hostile environment. For this, think of the book Hatchet or The Martian by Andy Weir. And the fourth sort is one that isn't used as much in this day and age, but was really popular with the Greco-Roman people, and it is the main character versus fate or supernatural or the gods. The cards are kind of stacked against the main character at this point because they are, by virtue of being mortal, weaker than their antagonists. In this case, think of the Iliad, right? How many times was Achilles about to win, but then some greater force of nature stood in his way? There's not much your main character can do in this except fight as nobly as possible. But in our more optimistic society of modern day, that isn't as fun a story, so that's why that one's kind of fallen off of the popularity wagon. Though it's still really interesting to read about looking back on the societies that produced it. So in having done as much reading as I have and in having studied writing as a craft and literature as an art, I found that the most effective conflicts, the ones that keep me hooked to a story more than anything, have three shared elements in common, no matter what type of story I'm reading. The best conflicts for me are personal, high stakes, and they're always layered. So to expand on those a little bit, when I say personal, I don't mean that you as a reader have an emotional connection to the conflict. I mean that the character as a protagonist has a direct involvement in the problem that they're trying to solve. If you know of my deep abiding love for Susan Dennard, then you also know that I subscribe to a lot of her writing tips and tricks, and she believes that the best conflicts are actually part of a trifecta of sorts, all related to the main character. This trifecta is known as GMC, stands for goal, motivation, and conflict. A character's goal is obviously the thing they want, their motivation is why they want it, and the conflict is the thing that stands in their way. So taking an example that I'm sure all of you guys have heard of at least once in your life, let's talk Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. At the opening of the play, Hamlet sees the ghost of his dead dad, and the ghost of his dead dad tells him to avenge his death by killing his uncle. You know, light stuff, I guess, normal family dynamics. At this point, Hamlet is given a goal. His goal is to avenge his father's death. His motivation for doing so is that the ghost of his dead father is telling him to, or at least that's the motivation of his external conflict. I'll get to the internal one in a little bit. And then what's standing in in the way of him avenging his father's death? Well, Hamlet's a bit of a wishy-washy kind of guy. He doesn't do decisive action very well. So because he is wishy-washy, his uncle Claudius has sort of figured out what he wants to do, and now Claudius wants Hamlet dead as well. Not much fun for the little prince. This leads me to the second thing that I said that all conflicts should have, and that is high stakes. I'm sure that you've heard the saying that a conflict that a character can walk away from is a book that a reader can walk away from, and that's very true. Hamlet very much cannot walk away from the conflict that he has started. Claudius wants him dead because Claudius believes that Hamlet now knows his big dirty secret and can cause a lot of problems for him as a king. If he decides to leave Claudius alone, then he's gonna end up dead, and if he decides to pursue his course of action and keep trying to kill his uncle, he might still end up dead, and other people could die too. To ask yourself whether your conflict is high stakes enough, you should ask yourself the question, what does your character stand to lose and or to gain if they do the course of action and if they do not? The losses for not doing it should always be much higher if the character were to walk away, as it were, and the gains, should the character pursue the course of action, should always be a little bit higher. You want it to seem imperative, like the character has to do this or else. The best sort of stakes are usually rooted in some sort of deep emotion. So yes, obviously, as the viewing audience, we don't want to see Hamlet die. We've already grown attached to our broody, whiny little prince. And we've grown attached to some of the characters around him, like Ophelia, for example. So we don't want to see him dead. But more than that, we have this need for justice. So the injustice of Claudius killing Hamlet's dad and getting away with it, if Hamlet were to walk away, eats at us. We want to see him not get away with it. In that sense, it's high stakes not only for Hamlet to have him succeed, but it's high stakes for us as the audience to have him succeed. The last thing you want your conflict to be is layered, like an onion or an ogre. So when we're talking about the main character, let's go back to Hamlet. He has to have an internal and an external conflict going on at the same time. We already mentioned the external one. A ghost is pushing him to avenge his father's death, and he's a wishy-washy person, and now, because of it, his uncle wants to kill him too. But Hamlet's also struggling on an internal sense. His internal goal is sort of to make a decision, to sort of decide whether to avenge his father or not. And the thing that motivates him here is his ability to find closure. He suffered a great personal loss, one that hurts him and hurts the people around him very, very much. He wants to make the decision to uncover the gross truths because, like I said, he has that internal human drive for defeating injustice. But his conflict in this case, and the thing that makes him so wishy-washy, is that he is wishy-washy by nature. He doesn't do decisive action. Brooding and being a little teenager is definitely more his style. The conflict in this case is a sort of inertia. It's a lot easier to stay the same than it is to do a fundamental change of your personality while also trying to keep your murderous uncle from killing you as well. And so Hamlet has to struggle with this internal conflict alongside the external one. And the two complement each other greatly because one is dependent on the other. Of course, this is only Hamlet in Act 1. The layers of his internal and external conflicts just sort of snowball as the story goes on, and eventually he can't handle them all, and that's why the story is a tragedy. And another reason that they snowball is because his conflicts, goals, and motivations are not the only ones present in the story. Every character has their own sets of GMCs, and some of them, like Uncle Claudius, who acts as the story's antagonist, have goals and motivations that directly are at odds with Hamlet's goals and motivations. Hamlet wants to kill Claudius, Claudius wants to stay alive. That's, there's a zero-sum game going on. If one wins, the other loses. So rather than complementary conflicts, these conflicts are in direct contrast with one another, and the clash of them and the anticipation of who's gonna win, who's gonna come out on top, that's what keeps the reader reading. So basically, in summary, figure out what your character wants or fears, and figure out why they want or fear it. And then, as an author, do your absolute hardest to stand in the way of the things they want and to make the things that they fear inevitable, unless they do a course of action. Make sure that your conflicts are personal, high stakes, and layered, and you might just have yourself a really fun story. And that's about all the time that I have for this episode of Craft Chat. Thank you guys so much for listening to me talk about conflict. If you think I did a good job, please be sure to give this video a like, and if you like what you see in general, please be sure to subscribe to my channel. If you'd like to see more Craft Chat videos, comment down below and tell me what topics you'd like me to cover next. And I promise I will see you guys with another Craft Chat or another video very, very soon. Goodbye.